Good morning to everybody. I'm Jerome Bart. I'm the president of the Fifth Avenue Association, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all today for our Pride on Fifth panel as we reaffirm our commitment to promoting a culture of inclusion and diversity within the LGBTQIA community. Fifth Avenue Association, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is dedicated to the promotion and continued success of flagship retail, five-star hotels, incredible dining venues, inspirational events, and cultural institutions, all located on Fifth Avenue between 46th and 60th Street. The Fifth Avenue Association is a not-for-profit that's funded by the landlords of the area, and that's really focused on making this the #1 destination in New York and the world. And I'm going to pass this on to Angela Pennyfeather, our Director of Marketing, who was the inspiration for this event. And she'll introduce our moderator, and we will get going with the conversation. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Thank you, Jerome. And like you mentioned, I'm Angela Pennyfeather, and it is my privilege to introduce Jessica Michault, who is an award-winning journalist, a public speaker, and a brand luxury and fashion consultant. I want to just thank you all for joining us, like Jerome mentioned today, for a powerful conversation on fashion and inclusion. And please feel free to add any comments or questions that you may have throughout this conversation in the chat button below, and we will certainly address it during Q&A time. For now, I will turn this over to Jessica.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the lovely introduction. I'm Jessica Michault. I think I'm going to make this a really casual, informal, relaxed conversation between three amazing people who I really respect within the fashion industry. And to start with that casual tone, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and we'll let ladies go first, Stephen. So Leigh, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I am Leigh Manheim. I am the Senior Vice President of North America Retail and Outlet for Coach. So that means I lead the buying, allocation, ops functions, and our amazing field teams across the country.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leigh. Love the background. Props to you. Michaela, how about you?
My name is Michaela Malvasio. I'm the senior content producer at Tiffany Company, and that I basically execute creative direction, art direction for all of our different platforms, whether it's social media or more traditional like print advertising.
Fantastic. And Stephen, who I imagine in New York needs no introduction, but go ahead, just for fun.
Oh, that's sweet. I'm Stephen Kolb, and I am the CEO of the Council of Fashion Designers of America, the CFDA.
Fantastic. Let's break this. Let's start off with something kind of an easy softball question to each of you in relationship to how you've each approached this particular month of Pride within your company, how you wanted to tell the Pride story for the LGBTQ plus AI. I'm sorry, I'm going to biff that at least once during this conversation. I apologize. But tell me how each of you individually decided this month, this is how we're going to honor the community through our company. So why don't we start with Leigh? How did it work for you?
Sure. I would start by saying that inclusion is a key part of our purpose and values at Coach and at Tapestry overall. So while we think of June as a month to celebrate Pride, it's not just about 1 month, and it's something that needs to continue throughout the year, which is really important to Stuart Beavers, our creative director, and the whole leadership team at Coach, and shows up in our casting for our fashion shows, our marketing campaigns. Not, hurry up, it's June, let's figure something out, and more, how do we take this moment to really celebrate? So at Coach, we've chosen to celebrate it through product, which is specially designed to celebrate the community, through our marketing campaign, and how the customer experience the brand across all of our touch points. And something that, I can talk about more later, but we've seen overall really positive feedback on. So like I said, it's a way for us to really celebrate something that is important to our brand all year round.
Michaela, what I loved about what you guys have done this month, and maybe I'm stepping on what you're about to say, but I loved how inclusive your advertising campaign was. It wasn't just a classic, can we say classic, community pride shoot with two people of the same sex maybe getting married or something like that. So there was a vastity about your proposition. I thought this month in particular that was different, but I'm maybe putting words in your mouth, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that like every single time we approach Pride as a brand, that we are super aware of like what the conversation and tone and climate is like. And so I think that it's important to continuously kind of push that boundary and to never do something that just feels commercial or just feels, you know, with the intention to just sell. It's really, I think, a responsibility for brands, especially like American brands, to kind of continuously push that envelope and what it means to be an inclusive luxury brand. And also, like, you know, the LGBTQIA plus community is such an amazing community. And how do you kind of take that sense of community and apply it to not only a campaign, but to also like even just like the way we work together in the context of a corporation? And I think that like all of that can be further expressed and evaluated during Pride, but to Leigh's point, like having that incorporation of like all of those amazing things that is the LGBTQI plus community, you know, be with you both in terms of the internal community building, but also like the external messaging to the consumer is like super important for it to be around all year long.
Yeah, that it seems holistic and authentic and not just a one of. I mean, we've all seen the memes where people are like, yes, you know, big brands discover, you know, Pride for 1 month out of the year, then nothing else. But if we were to argue that there's one, you know, industry that really supports the community, we would say it's the fashion industry. You know, being somebody who is from the community is, I guess we're very much more comfortable within the fashion community. We're more open in relationship to who we are and who we love. But Stephen, we were talking in the past, and you mentioned that even though that might be the general consensus that the fashion community is much more open and accepting, that you had some interesting data in relationship to that. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, that is true, actually. We conducted a study with PVH that we released in the beginning of the year, and it was specifically looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion in fashion. And while much of the research was around race, there was a lot about gender and sexual orientation as well. And the survey was conducted through interviews with people that work in the industry, online, in person, and some focus groups. And while fashion is likely more inclusive maybe than some other industries, there's still this perception for some people from the community who feel like they don't work with other people like them. In fact, they feel often that microaggressions happen more to them, and even to some extent, some people from the LGBTQ plus community that participated in the survey said they wouldn't even recommend to some of their friends in the community to work in fashion. And they feel often that heterosexual colleagues have more opportunity for advancement. I think we have to remember there's two sides to our industry. There's the corporate side, and then there's the industry, and then there's the creative side. And it's likely that the creative side of the industry might be more inclusive than the corporate side, although we've seen obviously people from the community in important roles, but it's still a very corporate C-suite, not that much different than we see in other industries. But, you know, just to mention too, for us at CFDA, we're not a consumer brand. So the way we approach Pride is very different than, say, Tiffany or Tapestry, because our role is really representing our members, which are 477 brands. And the way we can really be supportive is through studies like we did the diversity study we did with PVH. It's on the CFDA website, which helps leaders within companies recognize the challenges, but also a toolkit that helps them evolve the way they have policy and their own inclusion efforts. And beyond that, then tell the stories of our members, and really share them and celebrate them.
Well, talking about celebrating and sharing the messages, I think that you're right that until we get more diversity within the C-suite, we're not going to get there all the way. I think that's going to be a key nut to crack within the industry, and not just the creative side, but the corporate side, that people of all representations are on all different levels. But I am curious because I know sometimes with advertising and campaigns, it can be targeted. For example, you can have a pride or campaign, specifically to large cities, like to a New York, to San Francisco. I'm curious for brand, or a company like Tapestry, a brand like Coach, what's the thinking about maybe some backlash from, let's say the flyover states, as they call them, middle America, for a company that's being so, straightforward and strong with their messaging? Are you targeting specific cities? Is it across the board? What's the thinking?
It is across the board. So we have not targeted it to any particular parts of the country. And we've seen really positive engagement on all of our social channels. I partnered with our marketing team in advance of this, and her statement was, comments are supported with emoji overload. So lots of hearts and smiley faces, and super supportive. And in addition, I've heard from the field teams, just these incredible positive stories of, for example, one story, a mother and grandmother who were so excited when they saw the product because granddaughter is a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, and they just wanted to wear the product to show her how supportive they are. And then the store teams telling how emotional it is for them to be sort of a part of this. So those are the stories I'm getting. And it is honestly, in some ways, a really positive contrast to, we've all lived through a lot of what you could call social unrest over the last, 18 months, I guess. It feels, I don't know how long or short it is anymore. The days are blending together. And our teams have been dealing with various, the opposite of inclusivity, if you will, in some of our stores. And to see that not happen in June and not happen as it relates to this community. Again, I'm not seeing and hearing every story, but what's coming to the surface are these really positive ones. So, and as you mentioned, we operate in many states, all over North America is what I have oversight over, and not hearing, again, overarchingly positive, no matter where the stories are coming from. So really, really good to see.
That's wonderful news. I'm glad to hear that. I hear over at Tiffany, the reaction to the new campaign was not as 100% positive, or what is the feedback that you've been getting at Tiffany, and what's the thinking going forward in relationship to that?
I mean, it was positively received by the people that we were trying to reach. And the whole point of the campaign was to show and platform diversity in terms of race, age, and gender. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, and there's definitely various reasons, and I don't necessarily want to get off track into theorizing what these reasons might be, but there was lower engagement from a social perspective. And there was also a lot of trolls and haters and just really, really negative comments on our social that needed to sort of be policed and trafficked for just any sort of hate speech or just harmful language. And it's interesting because I don't necessarily think that it's going to be a reflection in sales, and it's not like we've had any PR that's been bad. Obviously what we're platforming and supporting is absolutely important and beautiful. But it does take a certain amount of guts on behalf of the brand and the C-suite, if you will, to invest in and stand behind content that doesn't get a lot of engagement, let's say, or does get pushback from a consumer that otherwise doesn't want to see the brand evolve in a way that they are not particularly comfortable with. And a lot of these followers that we have on social media are probably not even actual consumers of the brand, but they still affect, the metrics, if you will. And so it really takes a very clear point of view and a very strong stance on behalf of the brand to say, we're not going to listen to this sort of focus group, if you will, in this social space of haters. And instead, we will show trans people in our marketing. We will show Black people in our marketing. We will show trans Black people in our marketing. We will show people of all different ages and shapes and sizes and whatever else, is an expression of love and sort of what our brand DNA is. So I think that while we had some, pushback from a social perspective, ultimately the messaging is super, super important. And I think in the long term is going to be where all brands kind of go towards as we sort of evolve what pride messaging looks like and what the intent is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do want to talk about, and Stephen, of course, it sounds like it's around your time to talk again, but I want to open this to anybody in the relationship to, well, maybe Stephen in particular. There is a whole bunch of, the cancel culture is prominent within the online community. There can be a lot of backlash, especially when people feel that there's a pandering from a brand. How do you maybe, Stephen, kind of help brands to approach representation, Pride Month, and going forward in a way that does feel organic and authentic, and that isn't that it doesn't feel like a one hit or trying to target a market in a particular month where they think it'll be more advantageous for the brand? Like, how do you try and brief those brands out there?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think we all need to be sensitive that our work is not performative, but that it is authentic and genuine. And we also, at the same time, have to my big thing these days is give people benefit of the doubt that their work is authentic until they prove us wrong, right? Let's not come at it from a place of like, we don't believe you, but really kind of recognize and acknowledge when we see efforts, campaigns like the Tiffany campaign that are genuine. And so the whole notion of cancel culture is really, I think we like to the ability and also allowing people to evolve, because what we know today in terms of our own experiences and our own awareness is not what we knew in the past. And so that evolution is important, but it really comes down to, who are you working with? Who has a seat at the table? Who's going to bring their experiences to a campaign, to a corporate decision? And I think what Michaela mentioned is quite true. Categorized because the intersectionality of representation is so important, because you might have a Black trans woman or a person that touches many groups that are underrepresented, and really understanding that and having a full voice from many people is what's going to bring an authentic campaign. But to me, it's really about giving people the benefit of the doubt that they're doing the right thing, and letting them prove themselves before we start canceling or shutting people down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Leigh, I do want to talk to you about the "Pride is where you find it" slogan, because I find that to be very, we're talking about inclusivity in general, and I find that is very open-ended as a slogan for the campaign. I don't know is this something that will be ongoing? What's the thinking behind that? How did that come about? What was the goal behind it? Because it is open-ended and open to interpretation, so I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and we did have a lot of internal conversation about it too, as you can imagine. yes, it's the idea that it can mean so many different things to, again, depending on your experiences, and the where doesn't necessarily mean a physical place, but is really more broad in that sense. And so being able to kind of complete the sentence however each individual wants to, and what their experience means to them. So that's the thinking about it, purposely very open-ended in that way. And it's a good question about whether or not it will continue. Sometimes we, stick to those words, and sometimes we evolve. So I can't answer that question right now, but again, I think wanting to, again, and this is not just for Pride, but I think generally create more of a two-way conversation with both our internal and external customers. And I appreciate, Michaela, what you said before about it's not just the external customer, it's also our internal, everyone who works at Tapestry, at Coach. In some ways, that's probably the most important, more important than the external customer, if you will. So, so that was the intent of the tagline, and we'll see. Maybe it will continue. I'm not sure.
Well, let's go a little bit more personal. Michaela, what did you, on a personal level, feel about the Tiffany campaign? You were definitely in the thick of it, but on a personal level, how did it feel to you to see that kind of representation of your community out there on these giant posters around the world representing Tiffany, a company that definitely has a different connotation in the past of what it represented? This is a game changer, in my opinion, and I think it's incredibly impressive.
Yeah, it's really empowering to know that the company is standing behind this type of content, if you will. But I also think that visibility is so amazing when it's like when the platform is coming from like a luxury brand. And I remember like when trans models in let's say 2015 started to appear on the cover of fashion magazines, and this was prior to my social transition, and I would just see a cover with Hari Naf on it and be like, wow, this is being validated and supported by the community that I work within, and maybe this is possible to be out and also working at a company that that aligns with what I want for my career. So it's just one example of what it means to be trans, and I think that just putting examples out into the world is a great start for more trans people to see possibly themselves in media, essentially. So to me, it's just really, really fulfilling and exciting and overdue.
I absolutely agree with you. I do want to ask the three of you, outside of your own brands and the amazing things that you've done, what other brands, what other companies that you've seen have really done something that knocked your socks off as far as representation, as far as celebrating Pride, and or maybe an extension past the month of Pride, where people who really have integrated the concept of inclusivity going out past this celebratory month? Stephen, does any brand come to mind that really speaks to you?
Well, of course, every brand at Tapestry and Tiffany to start, but
good answer.
Yeah, look, I think it's easier probably to pick the brands that don't do a good job at it than the ones who do a good job at it, right? And I'm not going to name those. I think one brand that I think has really done something interesting is Fluid. Phluid, a guy named Rob Smith, who has a retail background. And Rob opened a brick and mortar store on Lower Broadway that has since closed and has transitioned the brand really to an online brand, but was able to partner with Target and a number of the big box retailers this Pride, really bringing product, merch mostly, to the masses. And I think the reach and what he's done in terms of Fluid is powerful. Now, a lot of it is maybe very merch, rainbow stripes, or not necessarily what we would consider designer. But the fact that he's created this reach and he's reaching a customer, as you describe in the flyover states, I think is I think it's powerful. So I think the reach that he's created, but also early on with this idea of non-binary or genderless clothes is something that I think the community is interested in, and it hasn't really been easy for someone shopping to either have to go to the men's section or the women's section, but we see now, and I think Rob's
Oh, that was such a good point.
a shopping experience. So he would be an example just in terms of shifting the conversation and the reach of the conversation.
It's a very good point about the unisex or the non-specific clothing. It's definitely something we're seeing with the millennials and the Gen Zs, that there is a desire to kind of blur those lines in a way that definitely wasn't there in the past. Ladies, does anything else come up for you guys? And I'm also curious to the room, what are your thoughts about the whole idea of the pronouns, Instagram giving you pronoun options, LinkedIn as well. Is this something that you feel is an important addition to an important step forward to the community in general?
I'm happy to weigh in a bit on this sort of genderless or, sort of non-binary, because today, for the most part, our sites, our stores, right, it's the women's area, the men's area. And so we've started to have a lot of internal conversations about what is the future of that and how do we think outside the box, if you will, on how to create an inclusive shopping experience. And what does that mean for product that we create? And then what does that mean for the experience itself? So we don't have the answer yet, but it's definitely something that we're in a lot of conversations on to figure out the best way to address, especially, at Coach, where we do have significant businesses for all categories, different with the other Tapestry brands potentially, but so more to come. But I think it's, and I agree. I mean, the brand that comes to mind for me, and this is my personal opinion, is Gucci. I think sort of the way they dress their models and maybe not specific to Pride, but just all kinds of people, all shapes and sizes, not necessarily overtly feminine or masculine. And I think that breaks that sort of European traditional historical precedent of what a runway show looks like, of what a campaign looks like. So when you asked that question, Jessica, that's the first brand that came to my mind.
I imagine it's the first brand that's come to a lot of people's mind. I think what Alessandra Michele has done is impressive. Any other thoughts? Any other brands that you think that are doing a good job? And or again, this idea of pronouns, is that something that you feel is really important, that this be shifted, that we have this option to redefine how we want to be addressed? Is that something that is a key, like we're talking about evolution outside of Pride Month? Is that something that you think is a key step forward for the community in general?
I mean, I think that.
Kind of hesitating.
Sorry, what did you say?
I can see you kind of hesitating.
Oh yeah, no, I'm thinking. I think it's so for like the pronoun conversation is always tricky because like I'm the kind of person that like I'm pretty like binary in terms of like how I approach my transition. Like I use she, her pronouns. Like I like to wear dresses. I have a sparkle clip in my hair. Like I have like I don't mind if someone assumes my pronouns as she, her, like it just feels more natural in terms of my experience. That said, like in certain contexts, like having my pronouns be explicitly stated, whether it be in the signature of my email or on LinkedIn, for a majority of people that I meet in corporate understanding, and not even like with like bad intent, it's just like not knowing. And I think that, I think there's a time that makes sense, where pronouns make sense, where, you know, having gender fluidity, to use the Gucci example, like, I think it is awesome that they are setting the tone as a luxury brand to sort of blur those lines. But then also, I think that there are times when trans or even non-binary people, and certainly cis people, want to sort of express hypermasculinity or hyperfemininity, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? So there's just a matter of just how that language gets integrated into marketing, and not telling someone like, this is your section, this is your section, but more so saying, here's what this piece can make you feel like. Here, you can have this type of posture and this type of feeling of luxuriousness if you know, buy this particular jacket or whatever it may be, you know? And I think that's where like the fun and magic comes in versus the semantics and the language, you know?
I think that's really well put. Well, how do you think about, you know, moving forward? You know, I think that the campaign is quite an eye-opening education for a lot of people, but can we talk about, for the three of you, what is it going to be as far as educating the population at large about, you know, the community, and how to, you know, whether it's, you know, the pronouns, whether it's how to approach people, ask questions, etc. Like, how can brands help to educate the population at large in a way that feels appropriate and organic to the brand, and doesn't sound like preachy in any way? Well, how are you guys all addressing that idea of knowing that you're selling products, but you're also, you know, it's more than that. You really are taking a stand to a certain extent. How do you balance that education and also, you know, being a business?
Well, for us at CFDA, being a trade organization, it's really about the people who work in the business, and how do we influence and educate them. And of course, we are very invested in professional development programming, which brings experts, experience to our members to help making sure that the recipients of our scholarships are truly reflective of society. It used to be always that a CFDA scholarship was based on talent. So you could be the richest, whitest, most talented person in the world, and we would give you a scholarship because we are really about talent. But we've shifted that over the years, and we really look at other criteria, whether that be lack of access, funding, and so for us, it's really about making sure that the people that we are supporting at the student level are the change makers, are the ones that are going to bring that knowledge. And even specifically, it's our 25th anniversary this year, the CFA Scholarship Program. We've created a new social scholarship, really focused on who is the change maker that has an idea that is reflective of the future. So that for us, it's about professional development for working designers, but really making sure the leaders of tomorrow, the designers of tomorrow, are the ones that reflect the experience and the foresight for a more inclusive industry.
That sounds fantastic.
I'm happy to share. So at Coach, we have employee resource groups for various groups within the Coach employee community, and one is dedicated to the LGBTQIA+ community. And over this last month, we within that created Pride committee, and they've done a lot to educate internally first. So for example, there was a training on pronouns. I think it was last week. Almost 200 people joined. So education internally, but also being able to support the community. So partnering with various external groups as well, to provide opportunities to volunteer, working with the Coach Foundation to support these groups financially. So I would say those, I think those two ways that we're trying to both internally educate and then provide the opportunity to externally support.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. What's going on at Tiffany?
I mean, similar, programs, if you will. We do have employer resource groups, which have been amazing. I'm part of the LGBTQIA+ one, and it's been amazing to be able to work on programming and community building. And we also have a learning and development sort of revamped vision of this idea of leaders at all levels. And what I think is exciting about that is that it really focuses on the idea, like I mentioned earlier, about community building within the context of a corporation versus traditionally more of like that hierarchy and some of the systemic things that then kind of come from that sort of without even any sort of bad intent. And I think that this like culture of feedback that's happening at Tiffany and this idea of leaders at all levels is offering a very sort of, it's giving everyone a mic to say what their needs are and what, they want to see differently from leadership. And I think there's a lot of room for more improvement. I think we definitely should be hiring more trans people. We definitely should be hiring more trans people of color. How that looks and what kind of programming comes from that and how those opportunities are generated, I think is kind of always like a work in progress and something that's always adapting and evolving. But I think that the groundwork is there and the intent is there. So now it's kind of just activating on all of this great, exciting, community building that's happening. And so far, I mean, I think it's feeling really good and it's feeling really impactful and important to the health of the organization.
It sounds like this, and maybe I'm answering my own question. It sounds like this has become integrated into your companies that, bringing in the community, classes, like you said, going out and volunteering, et cetera. There is concern. Some people worried that this is a fad, that this is just a thing that's happening of the moment and it will fade away like, other things that have in the past. But it sounds like it's being integrated. Do you all feel that there's a commitment really from on high that your companies are all really like, this is the way forward and there isn't any other option? I love the nodding. Okay, good, yeah. Good. So that's great news. So I want to know, moving forward now, from the campaigns for Tiffany and for Coach and Tapestry, what you've learned from what you've done this Pride Month. What are you going to be using from what you've learned this Pride Month and taking it forward past into the months forward to next year? What are the kind of the key takeaways that you want to make sure that you note for future reference, as they say?
You can go ahead, Michaela.
Yeah, Michaela, you go first this time.
I'm sort of thinking about this from my own personal perspective, but there's two things that very sort of tactfully come up in my mind. And one is improving our benefits. There needs to just be a bit of a tweaking to the language in our benefits that are offered. And I've been, I've been able to have a voice at the table, and there's many people within our benefits team that are listening and hearing sort of like how to modernize our benefits so that it's more inclusive to trans people and all different types of trans people. So that's like one thing that like very specifically I have sort of on my mind to help facilitate. And then the other is to figure out more ways to employ trans people, because I tend to be the only trans person in the room. I tend to, and I have a lot of gratitude for this, be handed a mic to talk about what it means to be trans and, what needs to be changed, or, what ways the corporation can support. So yeah, I think that it's all very exciting.
No, I can get it. It's hard to be that one person. I mean, I have no point of reference, as you can tell, but being that one person in the room has got to be tough. So to make sure that there are more people in the room, the show, because that you're there, it shows that there's a possibility for other people. It's that representation that makes it possible for other people to see themselves there. And I think that is so important. Absolutely. And hopefully we'll get more people in the room, like you said. Leigh, what about you? What do you want to take forward?
Yeah, I think, the work is not done. I think, to everyone's point and to what Stephen was saying earlier about sort of the creative side versus the more corporate side, and also the C-suite, I think it just has to be the idea of inclusivity at all levels and representation of this community, but I would say other communities that are potentially underrepresented as well in those categories, that it's not a 1 month activity. It's something that we all need to continue to be focused on, again, internally and externally. So I would say there's no specific nugget, I would say, that we specifically learned this time that we'll take forward, and more just that, as we continue to move forward in this work, it's great to see the progress, but we're not finished. And continuing the education, continuing the outreach, continuing to show that inclusivity in all of our customer touch points, we'll continue to do.
Well, speaking of continuing, I'm going to hand this over to Angela, who's got questions from the audience. I'm going to let you go ahead and ask those questions to the wonderful panel speakers.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you so much, Leigh, Michaela, and Stephen, for this amazing conversation. So we don't have any questions going on right now, but I did just drop a comment in the chat. So if any of the attendees have any questions for Leigh, Michaela, Stephen, or even Jessica, or as a whole, please feel free to submit your questions. Or if there are any last thoughts, Michaela, Leigh, Stephen, you have, we welcome that too.
Yeah, I might just add, for CFDA, and this is true, I don't know how many years old Tiffany is, or Coach, or some of the tapestry brands, but we're 60 years next. That's a very embedded culture and an organization that has a lot of nuances. We recently spent some time updating our bylaws, which were originally drafted in the 60s. So you can imagine a lot of the language from the 60s was dated. And as we were kind of even looking at pronouns and changing that to be more modern and current, one of my board members asked, like, why are we doing that? So it's just not that they resisted it, but they just didn't understand it. So I think you have to look at where a company is, an organization is now, and benchmark it to where they were before, and recognizes those nuances as companies evolve and change. So I have seen very authentically the work that's being done, and I'm always so proud when I look at CFDA members, whether that be Stuart or Armando, two designers that are part of the Tapestry family, and also CFDA members, really be present, because fashion is a industry that is high on the pop culture spectrum, right? We sit really besides music, television, art, and our voice is powerful. So for me, I'm very proud that our industry is using that voice in a way that is meaningful.
You're on mute, Angela.
Thank you, Jessica. We do have a few questions that came in, and Stephen, thank you very much for that. The first question, and I'll just throw this out to any one of you. What work are you doing to support more intersectional representation education?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to the study that we did and released in the beginning of the year. Intersectionality was a big part of that, really recognizing, about a lot of communities that obviously there's issues that women have less opportunity in work, Black women even more so. So if you're, a Black lesbian, even more so. So our study really kind of looks at the intersectionality and the challenges that come with that. And as part of that study, I mentioned what are tools that companies can implement that really begin, whether that be through employee resource groups, as both Michaela and mentioned, is like what are some of those tools? So I think just recognizing them and really, bringing some visibility to that.
No, I would agree, because it's one of the things that we face a lot within the within the fashion writing community or with a lot of interns who would love to work with us, they can't financially afford, to survive on an internship salary. So then you have to come from an affluent enough family that can support, you to work full time and then still live at home, and all of that stuff. It really has a huge impact on who actually can accept an internship that's unpaid. I mean, today things are hopefully paid in most places, but that is a huge challenge. Even the internship salaries that some people get are not sustainable for most people to survive on. So it's a real struggle to be able to bring in, make an inclusive group of people who are at the table, knowing that many of them struggle to make ends meet, just because of, their history and where they come from. So that's something that we're dealing with and trying to find solutions with, through ODA, my company.
Thank you for that. We have another question for Stephen. Where do you see the future of fashion as it relates to sustainability and possibly placing regulations in place to ensure designers meet sustainable standards?
Well, we as an organization and as a country, or in New York as a city, compared to our global counterparts, have really led the work around a more sustainable industry through a number of different programs. For many years, we were providing business grants to designers who would present a business plan that showed a shift to a more sustainable business practice. We have a very comprehensive, broad, open access resource database and information center on CFDA.com that is groups, consultants, templates, that really has been an industry standard in helping students and working designers and companies be more committed to sustainability. I've seen it go from a backroom conversation to a very public conversation. I've seen it grow from a conversation of one or two very passionate people to a board conversation, a marketing conversation, a sales conversation. So I've seen the commitment from the industry grow, and it's quite real. In terms of regulation, I think it's a good question. There's been some talk, even with the new administration, of a czar of sorts that would be a fashion czar that would mandate or require companies to meet certain measures or to perform at a certain level. I'm not necessarily supportive of that idea. I think the success from change really comes by education, knowledge, and support, so that people can be on that journey as they're comfortable with and on a timeline that they're comfortable with. Having said that, there are a lot of groups globally that create metrics or measures that companies can incorporate. But I have seen the success, and I believe the continued success of sustainability will come from not mandating, but from educating, informing, and in assisting companies with change.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm seeing a lot of, Stephen, you can attest to this, that there's a whole generation or two that are coming out of schools now that sustainability is a cornerstone of their brand, of how they want to function in the world. And it's not an add-on, it is part of the DNA of their company. And that's a fundamental shift in mentality of a generation, or maybe a generation and a half now, of designers and people who are propagating into the industry. So it's really exciting to see how the shift in conversation has been from it as an add-on to a fundamental part of a brand's DNA. So that's very encouraging as far as what I'm seeing around the world and the fashion shows I'm seeing.
I think for us, we see it on so many different levels of a brand. So that comes down to the material that the designer chooses, to the way something is made. But we love our studies at CFDA. And also recently we did a study with the Boston Consulting Group on the future of Fashion Week, because it's one of, it has a very large footprint. And so this study, again, through interviews, focus groups, both online and in person, began to dissect how can we present collections more sustainably. And we've already seen shift in that. I think the pandemic in some ways forced us to be that way because we couldn't in person. So every big fashion capital created their own digital platform. Ours was One Way 360, which will continue to grow and get stronger as a way for people to travel less and to create less stuff around presenting a collection. But as we return to collections live, and we see a big return anticipated for September in New York, that brands are being much more conscious in terms of the size of the audience, the level of production or investment to create into that, but also having a digital parallel opportunity so that you don't necessarily need to be there. So I think it's at many levels. And again, this resource directory on CFDA.com is quite an incredible tool that I think any brand or student or designer would find really helpful.
Perfect. Well, I think we're going to bring this panel to a close. Leigh, Michaela, Stephen, Jessica, thank you so much for spending time with us. This was really interesting and I think forward-thinking conversation. And we are really delighted that you made it here with us today. For our audience, if you believe this could be something you want to see again, or you missed a part, or you believe it could be of interest to others, the entirety of the webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel. And you can also find past examples of the conversations we've held on different topics with people in the industry. I'm going to thank everybody again for attending and wish you an excellent week. And please don't hesitate to follow us and to inquire of the Fifth Avenue Association. Have a good Monday, everybody.
Thank
you. Happy Pride. Thank you.
Happy Pride. Take care.